Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Downfield Podcast. As always, I'm your host and football aficionado, Jeff D., and thank you for tuning in. Today, the NFL division that we, with my very special guest today, will be breaking down for you is, honestly, the best division in the entire NFL, the AFC North, which sent 3 teams to the playoffs last year, none of which made it to the Super Bowl, however. Will they send 3 teams to the playoffs again this year? It's definitely possible, but I'm thinking only 2 will make it in the 2024 season. Before we get started with breaking down rosters and discussing coaching changes, draft picks, schedule predictions, and all that fun stuff, let me introduce you to my very beautiful and talented Irish dancing daughter, Sophia.
Hi.
For as smart as she is, though, she chooses to break her dad's heart and be a Bengals fan, despite being raised in a Ravens household. If you're watching this, you can see that she's even wearing her really ugly orange and black Joe Burrow jersey. How are you doing today, Sophia?
Good, how are you?
I'm doing well. Thank you for joining me today. Can you tell everyone why on earth that you decided to be a Bengals fan?
I've always really liked Joe Burrow. I watched him in LSU, and when he went to Cincinnati, I was really happy with it. So kind of followed him there.
Easy enough. How do you feel knowing that the Bengals were the only team in the AFC North to not make the playoffs last year?
Not great, but I'll give them the benefit of the doubt. Burrow was hurt, and they had a very reliable Jake Browning behind him when he was hurt. So honestly, the season could have gone better, but despite the injury, I think they probably did what they could.
They still finished with a winning record, 9-7, not bad. In the NFC, that would basically be up for considerations as far as wild card team, which is why the AFC is so much better. Do you think that they'll make the playoffs this year?
I'm really hoping. I don't think that is a given, but I feel pretty confident about it.
Okay. You're happy with the moves that they've made in the offseason?
Mm-hmm.
All right. Well, let's take a look at the Bengals. Last year they finished, like we said, at 9-8. I predicted that they would go 11-6 and win the AFC North. I picked them over my beloved Ravens, but the Ravens took that easily with a 13-4 record. Womp womp. 2 things that were working against the Bengals last year were the fact that Joe Burrow was playing injured and only played in 10 games with a calf injury, and the fact that the Bengals had the toughest schedule in the NFL, with their opponents having a winning percentage of .574. Head coach Zach Taylor and defensive coordinator Lou Anarumo will be back for the Bengals this year, but last year's offensive coordinator Brian Callahan has left Cincinnati to take the head coaching position in Tennessee, taking over for Mike Vrabel. The Bengals' new offensive coordinator this year is their old quarterbacks coach from last year, Dan Pitcher. And how do you feel about Pitcher coming in as the offensive coordinator for Cincinnati this year?
I think the fact that Pitcher has been a QB coach with Cincinnati also helps. And they have familiarities with each other, and they won't be learning curve or transition process getting acclimated with each other.
That is a very solid point. I think that's going to help them also, instead of bringing in a different offensive coordinator that Burrow has no idea who he's working with, and they can get right to work. So great point. In 10 games last year, Burrow threw for 2,309 yards, completing 67% of his passes, which was 10th in the NFL, for 15 touchdowns and 6 interceptions. He had a quarterback rating of 52.2, which was actually tied for 20th with Josh Dobbs. Gross. And a passer rating of 91, which was 18th in the NFL. Backup Jake Browning in 9 games, so almost as many games, completed 70% of his passes, which was actually first in the league unless you discredit him because he didn't throw for over 2,000 yards. He only threw for 1,936 yards. Browning had 12 touchdowns, 7 interceptions, and a QBR of 60.2, which was 12th and better than Burrow, and a passer rating of 98.4, which was 7th, right behind C.J. Stroud, and also better than Burrow. So, what are your thoughts on Browning? He was with the Vikings for 1 year. He never played there. He'll be returning to Cincinnati for his 2nd year. With the numbers that he put up, are you actually surprised that maybe the Bengals didn't trade him in the offseason, or what are your thoughts there?
I'm not really surprised. I think that they made a really smart move with keeping Browning. He's a very, very reliable backup. And frankly, I think he's just up there with Burrow. He's just as good as Burrow is. So I think he's pretty reliable.
Yeah, he definitely showed it last year. At running back, they had Joe Mixon, who was with the team for 7 years, but now he's 28 years old. Mixon had 1,034 rushing yards, which was eighth in the NFL at 4 yards per carry and 61 yards per game. But Mixon's in Houston now playing for the Texans. And the Bengals, to replace him, actually signed Zach Moss, who won't be 27 until December of this year. And he was the running back, too, behind Jonathan Taylor in Indy last year, who was not playing in the beginning of the reason for whatever speculation that you want to put out there, if it was a contract dispute or if he actually was injured. Moss ran for 794 yards, which was 27th. He ran for 4.3 yards per carry, which was better, and 56.7 yards per game with 6 touchdowns. So it looks like he was a little bit better than Mixon last year statistically outside of the volume piece. So did Cincinnati make the right move by going with Moss instead of Mixon? And who do you think is going to have a better year this year?
I really think Moss will probably have a better season given he is a year and a half younger. So long term, I think Moss might be the better option. Mixon has carried the ball over 1,500 times in his career for 97 games.
Yeah, since he's been with
So,
Cincinnati, yeah.
I really think Moss is the better option
Yeah, I'd have
long
to agree. As
term.
far as longevity, if you're going to give somebody a long-term contract, he's
Hmm.
got a little bit less tread on the tires. Moss
Yeah.
does, so you've got that guy out there that might be able to last a little bit longer. At the wide receiver position, the Bengals have one of the best in the game, Jamar Chase, who I know that you're a fan of. He had 100 receptions last year, which was 12th overall, 1,216 receiving yards, which was 12th overall, and 7 touchdowns, which was tied for 18th in his third year and only third year in the league. Tyler Boyd had 67 receptions for 667 yards and 2 touchdowns last year in Cincy, but he'll be playing for the Titans this season. Good luck with that. T. Higgins had 42 receptions, 656 yards, and 5 touchdowns last year, and he will likely be the wide receiver number 2 for the Bengals this year. The question is, who's going to be wide receiver number 3? Most likely, it will either be rookie Jermaine Burton from Alabama or Trenton Irwin, who's entering his 5th season with the Bengals. Who would you rather see Burrow throwing the ball to as their wide receiver 3 this year?
I really love Trenton Irwin because I found out a couple weeks ago that he said that he did Irish dancing in elementary school. So he kind of has a place in my heart for that. So
Very nice.
hopefully,
Yeah.
hopefully Trenton Irwin.
And this would be the second Irish dancing
Mm-hmm.
football player that you followed and liked.
Yeah.
The first one was
Alex Collins.
Alex Collins for these guys. So, yes, very cool. I love that transition. I love that. Cincinnati's best tight end moving along last year was Tanner Hudson, who had 39 receptions, which was 24th for tight ends last year, 352 yards, which was 30th for tight ends last year, and only 1 touchdown. All personal bests for him in his 4th year in the league, but not good enough for the Bengals. So Cincinnati went out. They got Mike Gesicki, who was in New England last year after spending his first 5 years in Miami. Gesicki only had 29 receptions for 244 yards and 2 touchdowns for the Dolphins last year. How are you feeling about Gesicki's numbers, and what are your thoughts with them bringing in him for tight end number 1 this year?
I think Gesicki left Miami thinking that he would be the primary tight end in New England, but then ended up splitting time with Hunter Henry. I think he is going to get back in the flow with his 2020 and 21 self again. He had 700 plus receiving yards each year, so I think he's up for that. I think he's pretty due.
Yeah, no, and he's a great reliable option. He's played in at least 15 games every year since he's been in the NFL, so I think that was a positive addition. You heard it here first. Bounce back season for Gesicki. Moving up to the offensive line for the Bengals, they actually got worse year over year from 2022 to 2023 as they finished in the bottom third of the league last year. At left tackle is still Orlando Brown Jr., who left Kansas City for big money and ended up missing out on another ring with the Chiefs last year. That was a good call. Left guard is still Cordell Volson, entering his 3rd season with the Bengals and failed to show any improvement from the previous year. At center is 31-year-old Ted Karras, who will be starting his 3rd year in Cincy, who had a solid season last year. At right guard is 6-year vet Alex Kappa, entering his 3rd year with the Bengals, and he was decent as well. Finally, at right tackle last year was Jonah Williams, who is now with the Arizona Cardinals. This year is going to be either 31-year-old newcomer Trent Brown, who's already had some injuries in the preseason, He spent the last three seasons in New England. Or it could be rookie Amarius Mims, who the Bengals took in the first round. Either one would be a decent option, but likely not as good as Williams, who made an almost flawless move from left tackle to right tackle last year. What do you think about the offensive line? And more importantly, maybe, who do you think is going to start at that right tackle position?
I think they're going to keep Mims out just for a season, I think, just to get in the flow of things, how they do it in Cincy. All the returning offensive linemen for the Bengals started all 17 games last year, and I'm guessing that they will be able to gel a bit more and get better, at least finishing to the top half of the NFL. Trent Brown he only played a whole season once in the last 5 years, so even if he does start right tackle, I think Mims will take over anyway. So, but I think they're going to start Mims not playing for now.
They'll start him as the right tackle number 2 behind Trent Brown?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We'll wait and see on that one. And maybe Trent Brown doesn't even start the season. Like I said, if his injuries continue, it might be Mims right out the gate. Overall, the Bengals offensive unit was 22nd in total yards, 15th in passing, 31st in rushing, and 16th in points scored. Notable offensive draft picks include offensive tackle Amarius Mims, taken number 18 overall from Georgia. I had Mims going number 20 to Pittsburgh, so that was actually a pretty solid pick, I thought, for the Bengals overall.
I had the Bengals picking Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. Seeing how they pick a lot of players from LSU, is kind of disappointed that he didn't go there. They didn't pick him.
Yeah, that would have been a great triangle, right? Between Joe Burrow and then Jamar Chase also being from LSU.
Mm-hmm.
And then you got Brian Thomas Jr. from LSU. Yeah, that would be actually kind of fun to watch for LSU/Cincinnati Bengals fans. In the third round, Cincinnati drafted their must-have wide receiver. So we thought wide receiver in the beginning. They went offensive tackle. Then they addressed their wide receiver concerns with T. Higgins leaving and got Jermaine Burton at number 880. And followed that up with tight end Eric All from Iowa in the fourth. So they've got their backup plan after this year if Gesicki does not stick around. So how do you feel about those picks overall?
Yeah, again, I was a little disappointed about Brian Thomas Jr. Draft picks weren't horrible, but I hope they could have been better, and I wish they would have been better, but I think they're pretty solid.
Yep, I thought they were pretty good draft picks overall. They addressed the needs that they had. Obviously, they don't have a need at running back. They went out and got a new one. They don't have a need at quarterback. They've already got one. So addressing the offensive line and wide receiver and tight end, 3 picks in the first 4 rounds, all addressing the offense. I think they're going to be a scary offense to watch this year. But enough about the offense. Let's go to the defensive side of the ball. The Bengals had quite a few big playmakers last year and were able to keep every single one of them. Defensive end Trey Hendrickson had 17 and a half sacks, which was tied for second overall, 16 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 10th, and 3 forced fumbles, which was tied for 11th. And at the other defensive end is Sam Hubbard, who had 6 sacks himself. Linebacker Logan Wilson had 78 solo tackles, which was tied for 26th overall, with 4 interceptions, which was tied for 7th, 3 forced fumbles, again tied for 11th, and 9 passes defended and 1 sack. Cornerback Mike Hilton had 12 tackles for loss, which was tied for 29th, and 2 interceptions. And cornerback Cam Taylor-Britt had 4 interceptions, which was tied for 7th, and 11 passes defended, which was tied for 28th. And defensive back Dax Hill also had 72 solo tackles, which was tied for 37th in the NFL, 11 passes defended, 2 interceptions, and 1.5 sacks. Do you have a favorite defensive player that is coming back for the Bengals?
Sam Hubbard, definitely.
Of course. How would you rate Sam Hubbard compared to some of the other guys that maybe get more credit? Myles Garrett, who's in the same division with the Cleveland Browns. There's a lot of talk of Max Crosby with the Raiders. Mm-hmm. How would you put him? Do you think Sam Hubbard is a top 5, top 3, top 10?
I think Sam Hubbard's definitely top 10, if not top 5. I don't think he gets enough credit, is what bugs me. But he doesn't get enough credit. And I maybe I'm being biased here, but I don't think he gets enough credit at all.
No, I don't think he does either. And being tied for second in sacks last year and being in top 10 for tackles for loss, I think that's really great. And 3 forced fumbles. I mean, the guy's an all-around player. I think he's right up there with Danielle Hunter, who was with the Vikings last year and went to the Houston Texans as well, for guys that just don't get the props that they deserve in the NFL. Mm-hmm. So since he runs a 4-3 defense with 6-year vet Hubbard and 7-year vet Hendricks, mentioned before, and D tackles, BJ Hill, who's entering his fourth year with the Bengals, who had 4.5 sacks and 2 interceptions last year. And then they've got newcomer defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins entering his 9th season in the NFL, coming over from Houston last year, who had 6 sacks, 9 tackles for loss, and 1 forced fumble. The outside linebackers are Logan Wilson and Akeem Davis-Gaithers, both entering their 5th years with the Cincinnati Bengals, and middle linebacker Jermaine Pratt, who had 118 total tackles, 2 sacks, 2 forced fumbles, and 2 interceptions last year. Cornerbacks are the aforementioned Taylor Britt, who has only played in 22 games in the past 2 seasons, and DJ Turner, who in his rookie campaign last year, after being drafted in the second round at number 60, didn't have any interceptions and only 7 passes defended. Finally, the safeties are Jordan Battle, who was a rookie last year as well. He got 2 sacks, 1 interception with 5 passes defended. And then there's newcomer Geno Stone from division rivals Baltimore, who had the second most interceptions last year with 7 and 9 passes defended in his 3rd year in the NFL. The Bengals defense last year was 31st in total yards allowed, 28th in passing, 26th against the rush, 21st in points allowed. They were also 12th in total takeaways, though, 8th in interceptions and 18th in team sacks. Notable defensive players drafted are defensive tackle Chris Jenkins from Michigan, taken in the 2nd round at pick number 49, who had 4.5 sacks in the last 2 years, and defensive tackle McKinley Jackson from Texas A&M, taken in the 3rd round at pick 96, who had 5 sacks last year and the year before that. So how do you feel about the new additions?
I definitely think with Geno Stone, I think they're going to do a lot better this year. And I'm not saying that to rub it in, but I think he's going to be the main part of why they turn their act around defensively.
Yeah, obviously they had a lot of issues on defense. They weren't a very good defense overall for as good as that offense kept grinding out last year, being 31st in total yards, 28th against the pass, adding somebody like Geno Stone who can be an immediate threat and an immediate impact on that defense. I think that was a great addition. I hate that move more than I hate the Patrick Queen move to Pittsburgh. Even though I hate Pittsburgh more, I really would have rather have seen Geno Stone stick around and not go to the Bengals. I think that's going to be a great help for them, unfortunately. Overall draft grade, though, I'm going to give the Bengals a C+. I don't think offensive tackle was as much of a need as wide receiver was. I think their offensive line, as we mentioned, was pretty solid across the board. And then they took 2 defensive tackles after signing defensive tackle Sheldon Rankins. I'm a big guy as far as games are won in the trenches, but I think this is a little bit overkill. You've got BJ Hill, now you've got Rankins, and you draft 2 other defensive tackles. Where are you going to play them all? Strength of schedule this year will definitely be easier than last year for the Bengals when they faced teams that had a combined winning percentage of .574, which I mentioned last time was the toughest in the NFL. This year, they're tied for 16th for the hardest schedule with the Chiefs, the Vikings, and the Commanders, facing opponents who had a winning percentage last year of only .502. Still pretty tough, but not as bad. Let's discuss the schedule real quick, and we'll see if we can come to a consensus as to where the Bengals might finish the 2024 season. So the Bengals start off at home against New England, the Patriots.
I'd say win.
I'm going to call that a win as well. I think the Patriots are going to have a hard time this year getting started with their new quarterback, new head coach. Week number 2 at Kansas City.
Oh, I don't want to admit this, but I think it's going to be a loss.
No, I think that's going to be a loss as well because the schedule makers actually gave the Chiefs a little bit of a buffer here. They start on Thursday Night Football against the Ravens, and then they've got 10 days to basically warm up for the Bengals. So it's a little bit of a disadvantage for the Bengals, and it's in Kansas City, so I agree with you. That's going to be a loss. Then the Bengals go to Monday Night Football with Washington at home.
That's a win.
That's a win. At Carolina.
That's a win.
That's a win. Baltimore at home.
Ugh, I'm going to say win.
Yep, I got to say win too. They usually split in the season, and I don't think that this is going to be any different. I think that's going to be a very well-fought game, but I will also take the Bengals at home.
Definitely going to be close.
At the New York Giants is in week 6.
At home or away?
At the New York Giants.
Does that even matter?
Well,
I think
no.
they're going to win that.
No, I don't think it does matter. I have them down for a win as well. And then they go to Cleveland in week 7 at the Browns.
Oof. I'm just going to say loss. I'm gonna
Yeah,
say
I
loss.
don't think the Browns. We'll get into the Browns next, but I think you're right. Again, a division rival. I usually chalk that up as a loss. Then they've got Philly at home.
Oof. I'm also gonna say loss.
Really? Okay, that's where we're
Yeah.
going to differ a little bit. I think they're going to beat them just because it's at home. I think if it was being played in Philly,
Hmm.
I would probably give the edge to the Eagles because, again, I think they're going to be very evenly matched
Hmm.
teams. So we'll give home field. I'm going to give home
It'll
field
definitely
advantage to
be
the Philly.
close though.
Yeah, that'll be a good game to watch as well. I'm
Hmm.
surprised that's not a nationally televised game.
Yeah,
After Philly at home, they've got the Las Vegas Raiders at home.
that's a win.
That's going to be a win. And then they're at Baltimore Thursday night football.
No.
You can say it. You can say it.
It's a
That's a loss.
loss.
The Ravens usually play very well in nationally televised football games. Being at home against Cincinnati, I think that's going to be a win for Baltimore and a loss for Cincy. Then Cincy has to travel to play the other Harbaugh,
Ooh, the
going to the LA
Chargers.
Chargers.
Oof. I'm gonna say loss, just because I know how Jim Harbaugh coaches. I think they're gonna lose that.
I think that's a good call. They've got 2 traveling games in a row. They haven't had a bye week yet. They're
Hmm.
going into the Chargers, who I think are going to be a much better team than their 5-12 record last year.
Oh yeah.
So that puts us somewhere. I think that puts me at about 7-4, and it puts you at maybe 6-5. So we're
Yeah.
somewhere in that same time as when they hit that bye week in week 12.
Mhm.
They come off the bye. They've got Pittsburgh at home.
Win. I
That's
think that's a win.
yeah, that's going to be a win. Then they go to Dallas for Monday Night Football, and that's going to be a tough game. That could go either way.
Yeah,
Your
I'm gonna
thoughts?
say loss just because it's at Dallas.
I would say loss only because it's at Dallas too. I think if Dallas goes up to Cincinnati, a lot of people don't like Dallas this year. A lot of people don't favor Dallas this year. They think
No
they're
one
going to take a big
has.
step back, but they really haven't made any changes to the team. So why not be a double-digit team? Dallas was undefeated at home last year,
Yeah,
so let's keep that, and we'll say Dallas for a loss. Then they're at Tennessee.
I'd say win.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a pretty easy win. And then they've got Cleveland at home on Thursday Night Football. So think about this: you've got Dallas on Monday night. You've got 6 days, you go to Tennessee. Then you've got 5 days and you're playing again. So you're playing 3 games in 11 days. But it's
Yeah,
Cleveland at home. We're getting toward the end of the season, week 16.
I'll say loss just
Ooh,
because I think Cleveland pulled it together last year at the end of the season with Joe
Joe
Flacco,
Flacco.
and I think maybe Cleveland could do that again. I have no idea.
I'm going to
So
give Cincy the win, and it's only because then it's a split with Cleveland. Now, could Cincinnati beat Cleveland in week 7 in Cleveland? Absolutely. But for all intents and purposes, I'm going to go win there because I gave them the loss against Cleveland. I don't think they get swept by the Browns this year. Week 17, you've got Denver at home.
it's a win.
That's a win. And then week 18 is at Pittsburgh.
Mm,
Cincinnati, I feel at this point in time, is going to be playing for a playoff spot, maybe some
mhm.
positioning, maybe a home field game.
Yeah,
Pittsburgh, we'll get into Pittsburgh in a little bit.
I think they're gonna win.
Yeah.
I think it's gonna be close, but I think they're gonna win. If Burrow can stay healthy, I hope. I think that they
Okay.
will.
So you got them for a win there. I've got them for a loss there. I think the
Hmm.
the Steelers are still going to play spoiler. But overall on the season, I think we're pretty close. If
Hmm.
I'm correct, I think I'm guessing 11-6, and you're going 10-7, somewhere around that area. But double digits wins this year. They
Hmm.
improved from their 9-8. The over under on the Bengals this year that Vegas is predicting is 10.5. So we're actually right there. I'm going 11. You're going 10. I think it's pretty accurate. They won 9 games last year with Burrow playing only half of the games, who probably wasn't 100% anyway when he was playing. Now he's got a new haircut, maybe a new nickname like Slim Burrow, and potentially a better defense. And that's what we've got for the Cincinnati Bengals this year. Sophia is going to leave us now, but do you have anything in closing for the recap of the Cincinnati Bengals and where they might fall in 2024?
I think our predictions are pretty accurate. Hooray! Hooray!
All right, thanks for that. Go Ravens, and
Ah!
we will continue on with the Cleveland Browns. The Cleveland Browns finished last year 11-6, if you can actually believe that. They even had the 5th toughest schedule in the process. You can thank quarterback Joe Flacco for that. I predicted that Cleveland would go 9-8 and miss the playoffs, but of course they made it as a wild card and got blown out by the Houston Texans. They still have the same head coach and defensive coordinator, but have a new offensive coordinator in Ken Dorsey, who used to be a quarterback for the Cleveland Browns from 2006 to 2009, throwing less than 100 passes, but still able to toss 7 interceptions and 0 touchdowns in the process. He spent the last half decade as a coach for the Buffalo Bills, and now he's in Cleveland. Currently at quarterback for the Browns is Deshaun Watson, who came to Cleveland in 2021 and has played in only 12 games in 3 years in one of the worst trades in football history. I'd put it right behind the Minnesota Vikings Herschel Walker trade, where Minnesota gave up potentially drafting a handful of great players like Emmitt Smith, along with having a handful of potential Super Bowls in the process. I'm not going to discuss Watson's stats, though, because they're irrelevant and because he is a garbage human being. Cleveland deserves better than having Deshaun Watson as their quarterback. At running back is potentially Nick Chubb, but I wouldn't count on him for much, coming off his second major knee injury, tearing both his MCL and his ACL. So it could be Jerome Ford, who carried the ball 204 times for 813 yards, which was 22nd last year, and 4 touchdowns. Or it could be Donta Foreman, who's on his 4th team in the last 4 years, coming from the Bears. Or it could be Naheem Hines, who split his season last year with the Colts in 7 games and with the Bills in 9 games, amassing only 33 yards in the process. Either way, it's not a very strong running back room. At wide receiver is Amari Cooper, who had 72 receptions for 1,250 yards, which was 10th overall, and 5 touchdowns in his second year with the Browns. And he killed me in the semifinals of fantasy football last year with his 11 catches for 265 yards and 2 touchdowns. Really appreciate that. Thank you. Wide receiver 2 for the Browns last year was Elijah Moore in his first year in Cleveland, coming over from the Jets, who caught 59 balls for 640 yards and 2 touchdowns. He will probably be relegated to wide receiver 3 as the Browns signed newcomer Jerry Jeudy from Denver, where he spent his last 4 mediocre years after being drafted 15th overall in 2020. Last year, he had 54 receptions for 758 yards and 2 touchdowns. Tight end is David Njoku, who is a certified top 5 tight end and
you're a badass.
Playing last year after suffering burns to his face and arms in a pit fire accident. Njoku finished the season with 81 receptions, which was tied for 5th for tight ends, 882 yards, which was 6th, and 6 touchdowns, which was tied for 2nd. He also had 599 yards after the catch, which was number 1 for tight ends. Njoku is entering his 8th year in Cleveland after being drafted 29th overall in 2017. The Browns' O-line is a bit of a mystery. It was supposed to be good last year, but started off slow and disappointing, and then injuries kicked in, and we never really saw what the potential was going to be. Jerron Christian started more games, 9, at left tackle than anyone else, but now he's with the Titans. Jedrick Willis Jr., who the Browns drafted 10th overall in 2020, should be taking over the starting role again after playing in only 8 games last year, but he's been disappointing since season 1. At left guard is Joel Bitonio, who will be 33 years old this October, but has been solid and can also play offensive tackle. At center is Ethan Posich, entering his 3rd year with the Browns, who started 15 games for Cleveland last year. Right guard is Wyatt Teller in his 6th year in Cleveland, who was the only one to play in all 17 games last year for the Browns. And at right tackle might be Jack Conklin, who only played 1 game last year due to a torn ACL and MCL, but likely will be 2nd-year man DeJuan Jones, who the Browns drafted in the 4th round in 2023. Jones started 9 games at right tackle before he went down with an injury as well, but he's probably their most viable guy at this point. So, many questions on that Cleveland offensive line, and it doesn't look pretty. As a whole, the Browns offense was 16th in total yards, 19th in passing, 12th in rushing, and 10th in points scored. But even though they have a lot of guys coming back, there's still a lot up in the air right now, and they look like a completely different offense from last year. Notable offensive players taken in this year's draft include offensive guard Zach Zinter from Michigan, selected 38th overall in the 3rd round. You'll very likely see him in some capacity this year. Looking at the defensive side of the ball, the Browns are bringing back a lot of talent to their top-rated defense. Defensive end Myles Garrett, who was drafted first overall in 2017, had 14 sacks, which was tied for seventh, and 17 tackles for loss, which was also tied for seventh. And defensive end Zadarius Smith, who will be 32 years old in September, had 5.5 sacks, 8 tackles for loss, and 1 forced fumble, which was his worst year since 2017. Outside linebacker Jeremiah Owusu-Koramoah had 20 tackles for a loss last year, which was good for fourth, 2 interceptions, 3.5 sacks, and 72 solo tackles, which was tied for 37th. Cornerback Martin Emerson Jr. had 4 INTs, which was tied for 7th, and 14 passes defended, which was tied for 9th in his second year. And cornerback Denzel Ward had 2 interceptions, 11 passes defended, which was tied for 28th, and 1 forced fumble, will also be returning. Cleveland operates under a 4-3 defense, so let's take a look at that real quick. Joining Garrett, who has had 10-plus sacks in the last 6 seasons, and Zadarius Smith on the D-line are 30-year-old D-tackle Delvin Tomlinson, who joined the Browns last year and had 3 sacks but underwent arthroscopic surgery on his right knee last week. There's also defensive tackle Shelby Harris, who will be 33 years old in August and had 1.5 sacks and a forced fumble in his first year with the Browns last year. On the other side is newcomer Devin Bush, who played his first 4 years in Pittsburgh and then last year in Seattle, where he played in only 13 games and was almost a non-factor for the Seahawks. Middle linebacker is 32-year-old newcomer Jordan Hicks, who spent the last 2 years in Minnesota and only played in 13 games last year as well, totaling 61 solo tackles, 1 sack, 1 interception, and 1 forced fumble. Are you starting to see a trend here? Older players, injury-prone players. A lot of that going on in the defense. In the backfield, our cornerbacks, Ward and Emerson, who I mentioned before, with safeties Grant Delpit entering his 4th year after playing in only 13 games last year as well, putting up similar numbers to Hicks. And then there's Juan Thornhill, who spent his first 4 years in Kansas City before going to Cleveland last year and playing in only 11 games with forgettable stats. Honestly, I'm not sure how this defense is going to do this year. It sounds like they're going to be held together with duct tape and crazy glue. Cleveland's defense finished first in total yards allowed, first in passing yards allowed, 11th against the rush, and 13th in points allowed. They were also tied for 5th in total takeaways, tied for 3rd in interceptions, and 6th in team sacks. Needless to say, they also had great depth in their defense last year, considering all of the injuries that they incurred in order to place 1st, 3rd, 5th, and all of these different categories. Notable defensive draft picks, defensive lineman Michael Hall Jr. from Ohio State with pick number 54 in the 2nd round, and that's it. Overall draft grade for the Browns is a C-. They had no 1st-round picks due to the Watson trade, no 4th-round picks. They got 2 must-haves because of age, but many players on this team are getting old and or falling apart, as I've mentioned before. Not playing a full season, not playing together a whole season. This team is doomed for the future because of that Watson trade. Strength of schedule this year is the toughest in the NFL. Sorry, Brownies. Get ready for a disappointing year. Let's take a look at the schedule. We'll go game by game, see how they're going to fare this year in Cleveland. They start off week number 1, Dallas at home, and I'm going to give them the loss. At Jacksonville for loss number 2. Then they come back home, play the New York Giants for a win. They're at Las Vegas in week 4 for a loss. And then they're at Washington, which I'll give them a win at this point. At Philadelphia for a loss. Cincinnati at home for a win. Baltimore at home for a win. And then they've got the Chargers, which I'm putting a question mark by, but also a win right before the bye week in week 10. Coming into that bye week, they're going to be somewhere around 500, either 5-4 or 4-5. After that, coming off the bye, they're at New Orleans, and that's the only reason why I'm giving them the win there, because they are coming off the bye. Then they've got Pittsburgh at home for a win on Thursday Night Football. They follow that up at Denver, Monday Night Football, with another win. At Pittsburgh the next week for a loss. Kansas City at home for another loss. Then they're at Chicago, Thursday Night Football, and I'm going to give them a 3rd loss. The following week, Miami at home, another loss. Then, to close out the season, week 18 at Baltimore for yet another loss. So a promising season for the Browns. But after the bye week, we start off hot and it cools off real quick. The over-under for the Browns this year is 8.5. I've got 8 and 9. And this is very likely the ceiling for the Browns. If they went 4-13, I wouldn't be shocked. If most of their injured players don't come back and play at a high caliber, this team is screwed. Next up is the 2023 AFC North champs and my favorite team, the Baltimore Ravens. Last year, I was being realistic in thinking that the Ravens would finish the season at 11-6 and making it into the playoffs as a wild card, finishing behind the Bengals winning the AFC North. Others had the Ravens finishing third, finishing fourth in the division, and not making it at all. Well, they had an NFL best 13-4 record, all while having the third toughest strength of schedule, playing opponents with a .543 winning percentage. They destroyed teams like Houston, 25-9 in the regular season and then 34-10 in the playoffs. Detroit, 38-6. Cleveland, 28-3. San Francisco, 33-19. And Miami, 56-19. All of these teams were playoff teams, by the way. At quarterback is arguably the best quarterback in the league. If you're an NFL player, that's what they'll tell you anyway, ranking him second overall for all players behind Tyreek Hill. Sorry, overrated Mahomes. Jackson threw 3,678 yards for 15th, completing 67.2% of his passes, which was tied for 8th with Patrick Mahomes, and rushed for another 821 yards on the ground, which would have put him 22nd overall in the NFL for rushing yards. Lamar had 24 passing touchdowns, which was 11th, and 5 rushing touchdowns, and threw only 7 interceptions. He was also 4th in QBR and in passer rating. At running back last year was Gus the Bus Edwards, who had 810 rushing yards last year, which was 24th, and 13 touchdowns, which was tied for 4th. But he's with the LA Chargers now under the other Harbaugh. This year, Baltimore brought in a king to carry the ball, Derrick Henry, who had 1,167 rushing yards last year, second to only Christian McCaffrey at 4.2 yards per carry with 12 touchdowns, which was tied for 6th, averaging 68.6 yards per game, which was 8th, on honestly what can be called one of the worst offenses in Tennessee. So can you imagine what he's going to do with one of the top-rated offenses this year? At wide receiver, second-year man Zay Flowers, who had 77 receptions, which was 28th, 858 yards, which was 39th, and 5 touchdowns. As a rookie last season after being selected at number 22 overall. Last year, the Ravens had OBJ at wide receiver 2, who caught 35 passes for 565 yards and 3 touchdowns. He's in Miami this year, though, with Jalen Waddle and Tyreek Hill. Good luck with that one. Moving on up to wide receiver 2 then will be Rashad Bateman, drafted 27th overall in 2021, who is in his 3rd year with the Ravens, had 32 receptions, 367 yards, and 1 touchdown, battling injuries through his first 3 years in the NFL. At wide receiver 3 is 31-year-old Nelson Aguilar, who caught 35 balls for 381 yards and 4 touchdowns in his first season with Baltimore and got a nice contract extension because of it. At tight end is one of the best in the game, Mark Andrews, entering his 7th year with Baltimore. Last year, he only played in 10 games due to an ankle injury because of what is now an illegal hip drop tackle. Andrews still managed to catch 45 passes last year, which was 22nd for tight ends, 544 yards, which was 17th, and 6 touchdowns, which was tied for 2nd. The offensive line got a shakeup in the offseason. The Ravens still have 8-year vet Ronnie Stanley at left tackle, who was drafted 6th overall in 2016 by Baltimore. At left guard this year looks to be Andrew Voorhees, who is an intriguing story to say the least. Voorhees was projected to go late 3rd or early 4th round in 2023 from USC, but he tore his ACL right before the draft at the Combine and even won the Morris Trophy, which is given to the top offensive lineman in the Pac-12. The Ravens selected him in the 7th round at number 229 and gave him a year to recover from his injury and adapt to the pro game. We'll see if that pays off this year, as he will be replacing the often penalized John Simpson from last year. At center is all-pro stud Tyler Linderbaum, drafted 25th overall in 2022, and is easily a top 3 center in the league. At right guard was 34-year-old Kevin Zeitler, who played admirably with the Ravens last year, but moved on to the Lions this season. Now it will be a battle between third-year man Ben Cleveland or fourth-year man Josh Jones, who spent last year in Houston. At right tackle will probably be rookie Roger Rosengarten, who the Ravens drafted in the second round this year at number 62 overall. So it's a very young O-line, but it has the potential to be very good once again. Overall, last year, the Ravens were 6th in total yards, 21st in passing, 1st in rushing by almost 300 yards over the Bears, who were 2nd in rushing, and they were 4th in points scored. Notable offensive draft picks this year are the aforementioned offensive tackle Rosengarten from Washington and wide receiver Devontae Walker from UNC in the 4th round at number 113, who has shown a lot of flash in practices this summer and fall. On the defensive side of the ball, the Ravens lost a few very productive players. 31-year-old linebacker Jadeveon Clowney, who had 9.5 sacks, which was tied for 25th, and 9 tackles for a loss. He went to Carolina for some ridiculous reason. Going from one of the best teams to one of the worst teams in the league doesn't sound like a very wise choice, but that's where he's at this year. Good luck with that. Inside linebacker Patrick Queen, who had 9 tackles for a loss last year, but didn't really do crap with the Ravens until Roquan Smith came along, has decided to go to the Ravens' main rival, Pittsburgh Steelers. Good luck, Queenie. You'll need it. Safety Geno Smith, who had 7 interceptions, which was 2nd last year, decided to go with another division rival, Cincinnati. So, who do the Ravens still have? How about defensive tackle Justin Madubuike, who had 13 sacks last year, which was 9th, 12 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 29th, and 2 forced fumbles. He got a great contract in the offseason and will stay with Baltimore for a long time, hopefully. Outside linebacker Kyle Van Noy had 9 sacks, which was tied for 28th, 9 tackles for a loss, and 2 forced fumbles, with outside linebacker Odafe Owe getting 5 sacks and 2 forced fumbles. One of the best safeties in the league, Kyle Hamilton, had 10 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 47th, 4 interceptions, which was tied for 7th, and 13 passes defended, which was tied for 16th. And arguably the best inside linebacker in the game, Roquan Smith, who had 84 solo tackles, which was tied for 14th in the NFL, 1.5 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and 1 interception. Baltimore still runs a 3-4 defense under new defensive coordinator Zach Orr, taking over for Mike McDonald, who flew the nest to go with some other birds in Seattle. At left defensive end is Madubuike, entering his 5th year, and right defensive end is Broderick Washington, who only had 18 tackles last year and 2 sacks. At nose tackle, they have Michael Pierce, who will be 32 in November and had only 1 sack and 1 forced fumble last year, or it could be third-year man Travis Jones, who the Ravens selected in the 3rd round in 2022. He had 36 total tackles and 1.5 sacks last year. At the outside linebacker positions are Owe and Van Noy, both mentioned before, and then inside linebackers are Roquan and second-year man Trenton Simpson, who saw limited time last year. The defensive backfield saw some improvement despite losing Stone. Cornerbacks are 7-year vet Marlon Humphrey, who played in only 10 games last year due to 2 different injuries, 1 foot injury that needed surgery, and 1 calf strain later on in the season. And cornerback Brandon Steffens, who had 57 solo tackles, 2 INTs, and 11 tackles for a loss, which was tied for 28th. He can also play safety, so you've got a great flex in there, or he could be your nickel back or your dime back. So there's a lot of moving parts in that defensive backfield, along with Kyle Hamilton. That means rookie quarterback Nate Wiggins might see more playing time sooner than later. However, at the safety positions, Baltimore has Hamilton and 7-year vet Marcus Williams, who also only played in 10 games due to a torn pectoral last year. Overall, the Ravens were 6th in total yards allowed, 6th in passing yards allowed, 14th against the rush, and 1st in points allowed. They were also tied for 1st in total takeaways, tied for 3rd in interceptions, and 1st in team sacks. Notable defensive draft picks this year were cornerback Nate Wiggins from Clemson, who was taken 30th overall. I had Wiggins going 25th to the Packers, and I didn't see one mock draft that had him going as late as number 30. So this was an excellent pickup for the Ravens. Baltimore followed that pickup with edge Adisa Isaac from Penn State in the 3rd round at number 93 overall, And finally, cornerback TJ Tampa from Iowa State in the 4th round at number 130. And he should have gone in the 2nd or early 3rd round in the draft this last April. Overall draft grade for the Ravens, what am I going to say? It's an A-. They got great value at both cornerback picks, a new starting offensive tackle, a solid edge coming from Penn State, and a few more depth pieces. Strength of schedule this year for Baltimore is the 2nd toughest in the NFL, with opponents having a .536 winning percentage last year, but that's still not as hard as what it was last year when they won 13 games. So let's take a look at the Baltimore 2024 schedule and see if we can predict where they're going to finish the season. Baltimore opens up the season at Kansas City Thursday Night Football, first game of the year, and they're going to do exactly what the Detroit Lions did last year, and they're going to walk away with the win. Then they come back home. They play Las Vegas for a win. Week 3, they're at Dallas. I think that's going to be a tough game. We're going to give them the loss only because it's at Dallas, and Dallas still has a very strong team. They come back home for Buffalo, which is going to be a win. Then they go to Cincinnati for a loss. Washington at home for a win. At Tampa Bay, Monday Night Football. They always do well on Monday Night Football. That's going to be a win. At Cleveland for the loss. Denver at home for the win. Thursday Night Football against Cincinnati. That's going to be a win. At Pittsburgh for the loss. Then they are at the Chargers on Monday Night Football, and I'm going to give them the win there, but that game is going to be fun to see John and Jim Harbaugh face off against each other again. The next week is Philadelphia at home for a win. Then they finally get their bye in Week 14. Coming off the bye, we're looking at 9-4. They start their second half of the season at the New York Giants for an easy win. Then they've got Pittsburgh, Saturday Football. That's going to be a win at home. Then they travel to Houston, they play the Texans, and I think that's going to be a loss on Thursday Night Football. Last game of the year, Cleveland at home, playing for number 1 seed, number 2, maybe number 3, playing for a home field playoff game against Cleveland, Week 18. That's going to be a win. Over-under for the Baltimore Ravens this year is 11.5. I've got 12-5, so I'm right there. Not as good as last year by 1 game, big deal, but I think it's very reasonable, all things considered. And the Ravens, once again, might just win the NFC North. Last but not least, actually, I hope they finish last, is the Pittsburgh Steelers, who finished 2023 with a 10-7 record and made the playoffs as a number 7 seed while having the 4th most difficult schedule behind Cincinnati and Baltimore. Mike Tomlin is still the head coach for now, and Terrell Austin remains the defensive coordinator. However, the Steelers have a new offensive coordinator in Arthur Smith, who is fired for being a terrible head coach in Atlanta. Arthur replaces former offensive coordinator Matt Canada, who was fired during the season last year in November for being a terrible offensive coordinator. So this should be really fun to watch this year. At quarterback was Kenny Pickett, who I said last year was not the guy, and he's not, at least not in Pittsburgh anymore. He didn't have to go far to find a new team, though, as Philly picked him up. It's not too bad. He gets to stay in the same state, I guess. Now the Steelers have Russell Wilson, who's going to be 36 years old in November. In 15 games last year, he threw 3,070 yards, which was good for 18th, completing 66.4% of his passes, which was good for 12th, for 26 touchdowns, which was 9th, and 8 interceptions. Wilson also had a QBR of 50.6, which was 22nd, and a passer rating of 98, which was actually 8th. Or will it be Justin Fields, who in 13 games last year had 2,562 yards, which was 22nd, completing 61.4% of his passes, which was an improvement over the last 2 seasons, but below Pickett and outside of the top 32 quarterbacks. Fields also had 16 touchdowns, which was 20th, 9 interceptions, and a 46.1 QBR, which was 23rd. This is probably the most intriguing quarterback battle in the preseason. Running back Najee Harris, who had 1,035 rushing yards last year, which was good for 7th, at 4.1 yards per carry, and had 8 runs of 20-plus yards, which was tied for 4th, with 8 touchdowns, which was tied for 11th. Also in the backfield, however, is Jalen Warren, who carried the ball for 785 yards as a backup that was 28th in the NFL with 4 touchdowns. He had a very impressive 5.3 yards per carry, which was third behind Christian McCaffrey and Devon Achane. Impressive and not a bad 1-2 punch in this offensive backfield. At wide receiver is George Pickens, who had 63 catches for 1,140 yards, which was good for 15th in the NFL, and 5 touchdowns. Most impressive stat for him was that he had 18.1 yards per catch, which was first in the NFL. Wide receiver number 2 last year for Pittsburgh was Deontay Johnson, who had 51 catches for 717 yards and 5 touchdowns, but he's with the Panthers now. The next few wide receivers are kind of a mess, to be honest with you. There's Van Jefferson, who had 20 catches last year for 209 yards and 0 touchdowns with Atlanta, or rookie Roman Wilson, who they picked up in the 3rd round this year, or Kelvin Austin III, who had 17 receptions for 180 yards and 1 touchdown in his rookie campaign with the Steelers last year, or Kez Walker, who played in only 9 games with the Eagles last year. He had 15 receptions for 141 yards and 1 touchdown. Any way you look at it, none of them are looking too impressive right now, even considering they're looking at a wide receiver 3 position. It's no wonder the Steelers are going after Brandon Ayuk. We'll see how that one plays out. At tight end is Pat Freiermuth, entering his 4th year with the Steelers after being drafted in the 2nd round of 2021. Pat played in only 12 games last season due to a strained hamstring and caught 32 balls for 308 yards and 2 touchdowns. The offensive line for the Steelers last year wasn't great, and they've made some changes and additions because of it. Starting with left tackle, last year was Dan Moore, who's still with the team, but the Steelers will likely go with 1st-round draft pick Troy Fautanu. At left guard is still Isaac Seumalo, who was slowed by a shoulder injury last year, and he'll be 31 this October. At center was Mason Cole, who played 100% of the snaps last year, but was released to save some money. And this year, it's looking like another rookie, Zach Frazier, who was taken in the 2nd round this year, is going to be their starter. At right guard is James Daniels, who missed 2 games last year. And then right tackle is 2nd-year man Broderick Jones, who was drafted 14th overall last year and started 12 games. Overall, the Pittsburgh offense finished 25th in total yards, 25th in passing yards, 13th in rushing, and 28th in points scored. I still can't believe that they made the playoffs with this kind of an offense. Notable offensive draft picks this year, Troy Fautanu, like I mentioned before, from Washington, selected 20th overall, and whom I had off the board at number 16. Center Zach Frazier from West Virginia, who was taken in the 2nd round at pick 51. Wide receiver Roman Wilson from Michigan was taken in the 3rd round at number 84, and they went back to offensive line and got a guard, Mason McCormick from South Dakota State, who was drafted in the 4th round at pick 114. Obviously, the Steelers understood just how bad their front 5 were last year, and they addressed that need in the draft. Let's get to what the Steelers are typically known best for, though, and that would be their defense. Starting off with who I personally think is the best defensive player in the NFL, outside linebacker edge TJ Watt, who the Steelers drafted 30th in 2017, and about 29 other teams are kicking themselves in the butts. Watt finished last year 1st in sacks with 19, also had 19 tackles for a loss, which was 5th, 4 forced fumbles, which was tied for 5th, and had 1 interception. He'll be 30 in October and entering his 8th year. On the other side of the defense, opposite TJ Watt, is Alex Highsmith, who had 7 sacks, 8 tackles for a loss, 2 interceptions, and 2 forced fumbles. Outside of those 2, there weren't a lot of high-profile, high-performance guys. And I'm not just saying that because it's the Steelers. Arguably, their best 2 cornerbacks, Patrick Peterson and Levi Wallace, aren't even on the team anymore. They led this defense in interceptions with only 2 apiece. And the rest of the defense was pretty average, to say the least. Let's take a look, though. Pittsburgh runs a base 3-4 defense with 30-year-old defensive end Larry Ogunjobi, who's played for every AFC North team at this point except for the Ravens. He had 3 sacks and a forced fumble last year, and the other defensive end is 35-year-old, 13-year vet Cameron Hayward, who has spent his entire career with the Pittsburgh Steelers. He played in only 11 games last year and had 2 sacks. At nose tackle is Keanu Benton. Whoa. Who is in his rookie year last year totally mid with only 1 sack and 2 forced fumbles. The outside linebackers are Watt and Highsmith, with inside linebackers Cole Holcomb, who you may have to scratch this year. He had a gruesome leg injury last season that's turning out to be worse than expected, and he may not play at all this season. It was just expected to be an ACL, but there's more damage in there than what they thought. Then the Steelers went out and got Patrick Queen, who they will find out soon enough is overrated when he's not playing next to Roquan Smith. At the corners is Joey Porter Jr., who was a rookie last year and drafted number 32 overall, but had only 1 INT and 10 passes defended. And newcomer Dante Jackson, who spent the last 6 years in Carolina, where he had 0 INTs and 5 passes defended last year. Safeties are Minka Fitzpatrick, entering his 6th year with the Steelers and played only 10 games last year with multiple injuries, including an ankle sprain, sternum bruise, pulled hamstring, and a knee bruise. And then there's former Ravens Deshaun Elliott, who is now on his 4th team in the last 4 years. Last year, Elliott had only 1 INT with 7 passes defended as well. Honestly, outside of the outside linebacker group, I'm not seeing a whole lot to be scared of this year from the Pittsburgh Steelers defense. As a defensive unit last year, the Steelers were 21st in total yards allowed, 17th in passing yards, 19th against the run, 6th in points allowed, tied for 8th in total takeaways and 12th in interceptions, and 11th in team sacks. Notable defensive draft picks, really just one, linebacker Peyton Wilson from North Carolina State, who they selected in the 3rd round at pick number 97. Draft grade for the Steelers is a B+. Their offensive line was pretty bad last year, and they drafted 3 O-linemen, so kudos for recognizing the problem and trying to fix it. They also might have gotten another starting wide receiver that they desperately need as well. Strength of schedule for the Steelers doesn't get any easier this year. They face opponents with a winning percentage of .533, which is the 3rd toughest, and about the same as last season. Let's take a look at the Steelers game by game for 2024. They start off at Atlanta for a loss. Week 2 at Denver for another loss. Week 3 is a home opener against the Chargers. I hate to give them a loss here, so I'm going to say because of the home opener, it's going to be a win. Then they're at Indianapolis for a loss. They've got Dallas at home in week 5 for another loss. And then they're on the road at Las Vegas for yet another loss. It is a tough start for the Pittsburgh Steelers. And even if they start Russell Wilson at this point, I think they're going to start to flirt around with Justin Fields coming in to see what he can do. You've got the Jets coming in at home. I'm going to give you the win there. And then you've got Monday Night Football against the New York Giants. We're going to give you the win there. You've got the bye, and I'm thinking 3-5 at the bye. If you're lucky, you're 4-4. Coming out of the bye, you're at Washington for a win. Then you got Baltimore at home for a win. Thursday Night Football at Cleveland, lost there. Then you're at Cincinnati for a loss, and then Cleveland again at home for a win. At Philadelphia after that is a loss. At Baltimore after that is a loss. KC at home is a loss. And now your season is pretty much over. Last game of the year, you might be playing spoiler. You're hosting Cincinnati, or who knows, maybe you're fighting for that number 7 seed again in the playoffs. Either way, I'm going to give you the win. Over-under for the Steelers this year is 7.5. I'm saying you're going to finish 7-10. It's not an easy road this year for the Steelers, and I'm calling it the first losing season for Mike Tomlin, which sadly could be his last in Pittsburgh. And before you start to scoff and laugh about that, it sounds odd to say, but Tomlin hasn't won a playoff game since 2016. In the last 7 years, he's made the postseason 4 times, going 0-4. Not making the playoffs again this year could be the final nail in Tomlin's coffin. As a quick recap, we have the Ravens winning the AFC North yet again this year, so I look forward to a very fun season. Every AFC North team has an uphill battle, though, and it's a difficult schedule for everyone in that division, so should be exciting again this year. I hope that you all enjoyed, and as always, please like, share, comment, and subscribe. Again, I'm also on Facebook, X, YouTube, Spotify, and my site is www.downfieldread.com. So follow on everything so that you don't miss a thing. Thank you for taking the time to go downfield with me. Until next time, I'm Jeff D. Have a good one, everyone.